The office parasite thought she could steal my $200 antique dish to save a few bucks, so I nuked her six-figure career with a single photograph. I was standing near a display of overpriced organic chew toys when I heard the unmistakable nails-on-a-chalkboard screech of Brenda's laugh coming from the checkout register. I peeked around an aisle of ceiling-high sisal rope cat trees, expecting to just roll my eyes and walk away, but my blood instantly ran cold. There she was, holding my late grandmother's irreplaceable, vintage Pyrex dish, and it was filled to the brim with wet, clumping clay. If you have ever worked in a mid-sized corporate logistics firm, you know exactly what kind of soul-sucking purgatory I occupy 40 hours a week. The fluorescent lights hum at a frequency that gives you a dull migraine by 2 in the afternoon. The carpets are a stained industrial gray that absorbs joy, and human resources firmly believes that a lukewarm pizza party is a fair substitute for a living wage. I cope with the monotony by cooking. They call me the unofficial kitchen queen of the third floor, a title I never asked for but earned simply because I refuse to watch grown adults sustain themselves on sad, sodium-packed microwave meals and vending machine crackers. Whenever there's a department milestone, a birthday, or one of those forced morale, mandatory fun Fridays, I bring actual, scratch-made food. It is my armor. In corporate America, if you feed people, they generally leave you alone. But every office ecosystem has a parasite, and ours was a woman named Brenda. Brenda was the undisputed office scavenger. She made a six-figure salary as a senior regional accounts manager, drove a leased silver Mercedes, and constantly bragged about her stock portfolio. Yet, she acted like a feral, starving raccoon the absolute second free food entered the premises. I have watched this woman wrap half-eaten bagel halves in cheap paper napkins and stuff them into her oversized designer tote bag. I have seen her drain the communal office coffee carafe into a personal, gallon-sized thermos at 4:55 p.m. on a Friday just so she wouldn't have to spend her own money on coffee over the weekend. She was a hoarder of the highest, most shameless order. But the mandatory spring potluck was a new, subterranean low, even for her. Management sent out the calendar invite 3 weeks in advance, completely obliterating any excuse for non-participation. You had to bring a dish. I decided to pull out all the stops to make the afternoon bearable and prepared my grandmother's signature baked ziti. The red sauce takes 8 hours to simmer down to a thick, rich perfection, bubbling with garlic and sweet Italian sausage. But the real star of the meal wasn't the pasta, it was the vessel it was baked in. I brought the ziti in my grandmother's vintage, hand-painted Pyrex casserole dish. It was the 1950s turquoise butterprint pattern, a heavy, flawless piece of pristine tempered glass with beautiful Amish farmers, wheat sheaves, and roosters etched in bright white across the side. Antique dealers would easily charge $200 for it in its immaculate condition, but to me, it was completely priceless. I learned to bake alongside my grandmother in that very dish. It still held the faint, phantom warmth of my childhood kitchen, carrying decades of holiday memories in its heavy glass walls. Friday arrived with the usual forced cheer. The break room was a chaotic, unappetizing mess of cheap plastic store-bought cookie trays, sweaty cheese cubes, and lukewarm spinach dip. And Brenda? She strolled through the double doors at exactly noon, completely empty-handed, but carrying a thick stack of plastic grocery bags. She didn't even pretend to socialize or ask about anyone's weekend. She immediately grabbed a flimsy paper plate and began excavating the buffet, building a monstrous mountain of food that defied the laws of gravity. By 1 in the afternoon, the vultures were circling the leftovers. I was trapped on a grueling client call, forced to watch through the soundproof glass wall of the conference room as Brenda descended upon my casserole dish. The ziti was mostly gone, but there was still a thick, caramelized layer of baked cheese and sauce crusted to the sides. I watched in mounting horror as she didn't just scoop out the scraps, she picked up the entire heavy glass dish and began shoving it into a heavy-duty canvas tote bag. I abruptly muted my headset, burst out of the conference room, and marched into the break room, my heels clicking frantically against the linoleum. Brenda, leave the Pyrex right there, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady and professional. I'm taking that home to soak. She already had it zipped halfway into her bag. She looked up at me, her eyes widening with a practiced, exaggerated innocence that made the muscles in my jaw clench tight enough to crack a tooth. Oh, Annabelle, don't be silly, she chirped loudly, gripping the thick glass tighter through the canvas fabric. I'm just taking the rest of these scraps for my weekend lunches. I'll take the dish home, give it a proper, deep scrub, and bring it back sparkling clean on Monday morning. I promise. It's the absolute least I can do since you slaved away cooking for us. I felt a cold prickle of deep anxiety at the base of my neck. I stepped forward and held out my hand. Brenda, absolutely not. That belonged to my grandmother. It's a rare family antique. Hand it back to me right now. She literally took a physical step backward, aggressively aggressively hugging the bag to her chest like a toddler guarding a stolen toy. The sweet facade dropped instantly. "You're making an embarrassing scene over a dirty dish," she hissed under her breath, a venomous, condescending edge slicing through her voice. "I am a senior manager in this department. Do you really, honestly think I'm going to steal your outdated, crusty casserole pan? I'll see you Monday." Before I could escalate the argument further, Helen from Human Resources walked into the break room to heat up her tea, and Brenda took the opportunity to scurry out the side door, her bag clinking heavily. I spent the rest of Friday night pacing my living room, filled with a gnawing, heavy dread that I would never see my heirloom again. Saturday morning, I desperately needed a distraction to reset my blood pressure. I dragged myself out of bed, grabbed an iced latte, and drove across town to an upscale, independently owned boutique pet store called Paws and Claws. I wanted to buy some specialty, grain-free organic treats for my golden retriever. The store is usually a sanctuary of quiet, smelling faintly of clean cedar chips and dried liver treats. I was wandering the aisles, letting the peaceful atmosphere wash over me. That's when I heard it. I was standing at the altar of overpriced rawhide bones when I heard the unmistakable, grating pitch of Brenda's voice echoing from the front of the store. My stomach violently lurched into my throat. I ducked behind a massive, carpeted cat tree, my heart suddenly pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I peeked through a narrow gap in the scratching posts, holding my breath. There she was, Brenda. She was dressed in pristine athletic wear that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, leaning casually against the polished checkout counter and chatting up the teenage cashier. And sitting on the glass counter, right next to the digital register, was my grandmother's turquoise Pyrex dish. I squinted, violently rubbing my eyes, trying to make sense of the horrifying tableau in front of me. The dish wasn't clean. It wasn't filled with leftover baked ziti. It was overflowing to the rim with a dense, gray, granular substance. It was clumped together in wet, heavy, unmistakably soiled mounds. "I'm telling you, you have to try it. It saves me hundreds of dollars a year," Brenda was saying to the bewildered teenage girl behind the register, her tone dripping with arrogant pride. "I am the absolute queen of frugal lifestyle hacks. Why on earth would I pay $30 or $40 for an ugly plastic litter box from a pet store?" The young cashier blinked, her hands hovering nervously over a bag of premium salmon flakes. "Ma'am, I don't think you're supposed to use kitchenware for that." Brenda waved her hand dismissively, scoffing loud enough to echo through the dead quiet store. "My cat is a purebred Persian. He is a king. He is so incredibly spoiled that he absolutely refuses to use standard plastic litter boxes because the cheap material absorbs odors and they smell too much for his sensitive nose. So I just borrow these heavy glass baking dishes from the girls at work. They're fantastic. Glass is non-porous, so it doesn't hold the urine smell, and they are so much easier to carry out to the patio and hose down after he's done his business." My vision actually went completely dark at the edges. A freezing, suffocating wave of pure, unadulterated adrenaline crashed over my entire body. My grandmother's dish. The dish she used to bake sweet apple cobbler for my 10th birthday. The dish I had lovingly carried to the office less than 24 hours ago. It was currently sitting on a retail counter, acting as a literal toilet for a flat-faced feline. The dark gray clumps weren't just clay. They were soaked through with cat urine. I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out. I wanted to sprint across the carpeted aisles, tackle her to the polished concrete floor, and rip the glass from her perfectly manicured hands. My fingers dug into the base of the cat tree so hard my knuckles turned a bruised shade of white. I felt the heat rising in my neck and my vision went blurry with an anger so intense it tasted like copper in the back of my mouth. But something primal kept my feet rooted to the spot. A horrifying, morbid intuition told me to wait. That's when the real bombshell dropped. Brenda reached deep into her oversized designer tote bag, the exact same bag she used to hoard our office bagels, and pulled out a massive, bulk-sized, generic brand bag of dry double chocolate cake mix. She slammed the plastic bag onto the counter, right next to the litter-filled heirloom. The cashier looked at the cheap bulk cake mix, then slowly shifted her gaze back to the makeshift litter box, looking visibly nauseous. Are you buying baking supplies here?" the girl stammered. Brenda leaned in closely, resting her elbows on the counter. She lowered her voice to a whisper, but in the dead silence of the boutique, I heard every single sinister syllable with razor-sharp clarity. "Oh, no, I bought this bulk mix at the discount warehouse down the street," Brenda whispered, a conspiratorial, wicked grin spreading across her foundation-caked face. "But the absolute best part of my little hack? These heavy glass dishes are absolutely great for baking my famous office brownies. Once Mr. Whiskers makes a mess of them for a few days, I just dump the dirty clay into the trash, give the glass a quick rinse in the kitchen sink with some Dawn dish soap, and pour the wet batter right in. The cashier took a physical step backward, her spine hitting the shelves behind her, her eyes widening in sheer, paralyzing horror. They bake so evenly in the heavy glass. Brenda cackled, completely and utterly oblivious to the young girl's profound revulsion. I actually brought a massive batch to our mandatory spring potluck yesterday. Everyone was begging me for the recipe. I just use this cheap powder mix and bake it in the borrowed glass. What they don't know won't hurt them, right? It all sterilizes in the hot oven anyway. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me, sending my stomach into a free fall. My throat closed up so tightly I couldn't swallow. The spring potluck. Yesterday, I had seen the brownies. They were sitting on a cheap silver plastic platter near the water cooler. I hadn't eaten one, thank God, because I'm strictly a savory person and I avoid cheap chocolate. But my deskmate, Sarah, had eaten two. Jim from accounting, who is currently undergoing aggressive chemotherapy and has a severely compromised immune system, had wrapped 3 of them in napkins to take home for his young kids. Half the department, including our branch manager and the entire logistics team, had devoured those thick, dense, double chocolate brownies. Brownies baked in a vessel that, 48 hours prior, had been a literal, functioning toilet for a purebred Persian cat. My shock instantly evaporated, burning away into a white-hot, blinding, incandescent rage. This wasn't just petty workplace theft anymore. This wasn't just disrespecting my grandmother's sacred memory. This was a biological attack. She was actively, knowingly feeding my coworkers severe fecal cross-contamination because she was too incredibly cheap to buy a $10 metal baking pan and too lazy to cook real, safe food. She was poisoning people to save a few pennies. I didn't tap her on the shoulder. I didn't loudly announce myself. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and immediately swiped to open the camera application. I stepped out from behind the towering cat tree, walking with silent, deliberate, predatory purpose until I was standing exactly 6 feet behind her right shoulder. I raised the phone. I made sure the framing was absolutely, indisputably perfect. The bright, overhead boutique lighting illuminated everything flawlessly. Brenda's smug, smiling face clearly visible in the reflection of a mirrored display behind the counter, the massive bag of cheap bulk cake mix, and my beautiful, vintage, turquoise Pyrex dish, unmistakably filled with clumped, soiled, gray cat litter. I tapped the screen to lock the focus, and then, I firmly pressed the shutter button. I had completely forgotten to silence my phone. A loud, crisp, artificial snap echoed through the quiet store like a gunshot, accompanied by the blinding white flash of the camera lens. Brenda froze. The smug, self-satisfied grin melted off her face in real time. She turned around slowly, the rubber soles of her expensive sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete floor. When her eyes finally met mine, the blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a fresh cadaver. She turned a shade of pasty, translucent white that perfectly matched the marble display tables. Her mouth opened, her jaw working up and down, but only a dry, rattling squeak came out. "A quick rinse in the sink, Brenda," I whispered. The sound of my own voice terrified me. It wasn't a yell. It was a low, guttural, demonic rasp, vibrating with so much pure fury that my vocal cords actually ached. "You fed Jim from accounting cat feces." "Annabelle," she stammered, her hand suddenly trembling so violently she dropped her car keys. "Annabelle, listen to me. It's not what it looks like at all. I was just going to wash it, I swear on my life. I haven't used your specific dish for the brownies yet. That was a totally different old dish. I was just making a stupid joke to the girl." "Don't," I snapped, taking one menacing step closer. She shrank back, her spine curving defensively. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence and lie to me. I heard every single word you just said." In her blind panic, she reached back behind her to grab the Pyrex dish off the counter, perhaps instinctively trying to hide the evidence of her crime. But her hands were shaking too badly, slick with sudden cold sweat. Her manicured fingers slipped clumsily against the smooth, heavy glass. "No, wait," she screamed, her voice cracking into a frantic sob. The heavy dish tumbled off the edge of the high retail counter. It seemed to fall in agonizing slow motion. I stood there and watched the beautiful turquoise pattern, the irreplaceable Amish roosters that had sat proudly on my grandmother's dining table for 6 long decades, plummet toward the unforgiving polished concrete floor. The impact sounded like a bomb going off. The 60-year-old tempered glass shattered into a million jagged, blue-stained pieces. A massive, suffocating cloud of gray, urine-soaked clay dust exploded into the air, coating Brenda's expensive leggings, her designer leather tote bag, and her shoes in a thick, horrifying layer of soiled litter. The cashier let out a muffled, terrified shriek and ducked completely out of sight behind the register. Brenda stood paralyzed in the epicenter of the toxic debris cloud, staring down at the absolute ruins of my family heirloom. She slowly looked up at me, her eyes darting frantically, her chest heaving. You startled me. Look what you made me do. You owe me new boots," she screeched, desperately trying to pivot the blame, her deeply ingrained narcissism fighting fiercely through her sheer terror. I didn't say a single word. I didn't shed a single tear for the dish, even though my chest felt like it was violently caving in on itself. I just looked her dead in the eye, gave her a slow, terrifying, dead-eyed smile, and held up my phone. I tapped the screen exactly once to show her the crystal clear, high-resolution photograph. Then, I turned on my heel and walked out of the store. I didn't wait for Monday morning. I didn't wait for the Human Resources Department to open their office at 9 o'clock. As soon as I got into the driver's seat of my car and slammed the doors locked, my fingers were flying frantically across my phone keyboard. I opened the company-wide Slack application. We have a massive general channel that includes all 140 employees, from the entry-level mailroom clerks all the way up to the elusive regional CEO. To ensure maximum coverage, I also opened the unofficial office WhatsApp group, a sacred space where the corporate managers couldn't delete or moderate our messages. I attached the photo. The resolution was absolutely magnificent. You could literally zoom in and see the dampness of the clumps in the litter, and clearly read the brand name of the bulk cake mix sitting directly beside it. I typed out the caption with clinical, merciless, devastating precision. Asterisk to everyone who enjoyed Brenda's famous double chocolate brownies at the spring potluck yesterday afternoon. Please see the.
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.